They said it was just another rotation, another quiet evening in a forgotten corner of the base. But stories like this never begin the way you expect, because behind every routine, every small, unnoticed task, history waits in silence until it chooses to reveal itself. And that night, it started with something so ordinary, it was almost invisible. A young woman in her late 20s, Sergeant Elena Morales, sitting alone in the gear room with nothing but a rack, a bottle of cleaner, and a row of helmets that had seen more sky, fire, and fear than most people could imagine. And if you agree that sometimes it's the smallest, quietest moments that carry the heaviest weight in a soldier's life, make sure to like and subscribe, because this story will show you why that truth is burned into memory. Elena was 28, a helicopter crew chief, and though her uniform carried her name stitched proudly above her heart, she often wondered if anyone really saw her beyond the roles: mechanic, cleaner, the one who kept things running so others could fly. She wasn't the loudest voice in the squadron, wasn't the one who cracked jokes in the mess hall, and in moments like this, she felt almost invisible, as though her whole existence was measured in grease stains, checklists, and silence. But she never let those thoughts linger too long, because deep down she knew every helmet she polished, every strap she checked, every smudge she cleared could be the difference between a soldier seeing one more sunrise or none at all. The gear room was quiet that night, the hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the faint scent of oil and dust, her hands moving with practiced rhythm, wiping one helmet after another, setting them down in a neat row like soldiers at attention. And though the task seemed endless, there was a strange calm in it, like a ritual she couldn't break. She thought of her father sometimes when she worked like this. A factory worker who spent 30 years punching clocks and cleaning machines no one ever thanked him for, who told her once when she was 12, "It's not about who notices, it's about who needs it done." And those words had stayed with her through training, through long deployments, through the nights she lay awake wondering why she chose this path. In those quiet minutes, she almost forgot where she was, almost forgot the sand outside, the rotor blades resting silent in the hangar, the war that never truly left their airspace. But the truth was, in war, quiet moments never lasted. The radio on her hip crackled, static spitting into the silence, and then the lieutenant's voice cut through, sharp, urgent, carrying words she hadn't heard in months. "Viper Dawn, eyes up." Elena froze, the rag slipping from her hand, because that call wasn't routine. It was a summons, a warning, a signal that everything she thought was ordinary about this evening was about to change. And in the span of a heartbeat, the helmets in front of her were no longer just gear. They were lifelines, waiting for the storm. She rose, muscles tensing, heart pounding, a voice inside her whispering that she had been preparing for this moment every day. In every unnoticed hour she spent wiping and checking, in every quiet prayer she said when no one was listening. And as she grabbed her own helmet, the one she polished so many times the visor reflected her face like a mirror, she realized the calm she'd felt seconds earlier had vanished, replaced by something heavier: responsibility, urgency, the weight of lives she hadn't met yet but might soon carry. Outside, she could already hear the distant shuffle of boots, the rising hum of the hangar coming alive, and she knew in that instant that the story she'd remember years later, the one no one would ever fully understand unless they had been there, didn't begin with glory or explosions or medals pinned to a chest, but right here, in a room that smelled of oil and dust, where a woman barely pushing 30 wiped down helmets until a voice crackled across the air and changed everything. And that is where the story truly begins. The gear room door slammed behind me as I broke into a jog, helmet under my arm, the lieutenant's words still burning in my ears. "Viper Dawn, eyes up." You never forget the way those words feel the first time they come for you personally. It's not a phrase they toss around casually, not some call sign chatter to break the monotony. No, when that phrase hits the air, you know the clock is running faster than your heartbeat, and someone out there is bleeding, waiting, praying that the sound of our rotors will be the difference between never going home and one more sunrise. And in that moment, every doubt I'd ever carried about being young, about being a woman in a crew chief's seat, about being the quiet one who didn't laugh the loudest or boast the most, all of it burned away, because the war doesn't care about your insecurities. It only cares about whether you show up, whether you're steady when the fire starts, and whether your hands are strong enough to keep the bird in the air when chaos tries to drag it down. The hangar was alive when I got there, lights blinding after the dim hum of the gear room, mechanics shouting, the medic already sliding packs of gauze, morphine, and blood bags into their slots like a man rehearsing for a play he'd already performed 100 times, the pilots strapping in, flipping switches, their eyes sharp but unreadable, as if the weight of command had carved something permanent in their gaze, and me, the youngest one in that cockpit, rushing to my seat, strapping on my vest, my headset, my gloves, every motion drilled into me so many times it felt less like memory and more like instinct. My lieutenant gave me a quick nod as I passed, just a flick of the eyes that said everything words didn't have time for. We need you steady, Morales. Don't think. Just do. The engine coughed, roared, then settled into that low, hungry growl that vibrates through your bones, the kind of sound that tells you there's no going back. And as the rotors began to spin, chopping the air harder and harder until the dust swirled around us like a storm, I felt my chest tighten, but I forced my breathing into rhythm with the blades. Inhale, exhale, whoop whoop whoop, until the fear turned into focus. The mission details crackled in over the comms as we taxied out of the hangar. The colonel's voice clipped, all business. Patrol ambushed on the outskirts. 2 critical, 1 walking wounded. Potential hostile fires still active in the area. Evac window closing fast. Our bird the only one within range. That was the kind of call that turned seconds into gold. You didn't waste them. You spent them like a miser clutching coins, careful, deliberate, because a slip meant a life falling through your fingers. The pilots leaned forward, eyes on the night sky, their gloved hands smooth on the controls, and I turned my head to the medic, who was busy strapping down gear, his jaw tight, but his motions calm, like a man who'd learned long ago that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. I gave him a thumbs up, and though he didn't smile, he gave it back, and in that simple gesture we sealed a pact. Whatever waited out there, we'd face it together. Then the nose lifted, the tail followed, and suddenly the ground fell away beneath us, the hangars shrinking, the desert stretching, the night swallowing us whole as the bird shuddered once, caught the air, and surged forward into the dark. Flying into a hot zone at night is a lesson in trust. You trust the pilots to see the unseen, to dance with the wind like it's an old partner who knows the steps. You trust the medic to be your second pair of eyes and hands, ready for whatever chaos spills into the cabin. And above all, you trust yourself, because if you don't, no one else can. My headset crackled with the sound of chatter, coordinates being called, ranges marked, warnings of possible small arms fire in the vicinity, and I tightened my grip on the mounted weapon by the window, scanning the horizon through the green haze of night vision. The desert looked endless from up here, a sea of shadows broken only by the occasional flash of tracer fire in the distance. Each burst a reminder that the ground was alive with danger. My pulse matched the rhythm of the rotors, each beat a reminder that we weren't flying into a drill, weren't part of some training exercise designed to test our nerves. This was real, raw, and in less than 10 minutes we'd be landing in a place where men were bleeding out in the dirt, hoping strangers in a bird of steel would carry them away from death's grip. I thought of my training then, the endless nights where instructors screamed until their voices cracked, the drills where we carried stretchers until our arms felt like they'd break, the repetition of wiping sweat and grease from my eyes while hands fumbled with straps and locks, because they wanted us to learn one truth. When it's real, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall back on training, on muscle memory, on the hours when no one was watching and you could have cut corners but didn't. And I realized, with a clarity that almost scared me, that wiping helmets in the gear room wasn't just busy work, wasn't just about keeping plastic shiny. It was part of this, part of the ritual that made me steady now, part of why my hands didn't shake as I scanned the dark for muzzle flashes. The call came sudden, 2 minutes out. Possible fire on landing. My gut clenched, but my mouth stayed steady as I confirmed, my eyes scanning, the medic bracing himself. The pilots banked hard, the horizon tilting, the bird shuddering as air buffeted us. And then I saw it. Faint but unmistakable. The flashing lights of rifles, the chaos of men pinned down, muzzle flashes flickering like fireflies in the night. The patrol was there, Three shadows sprawled in the dirt. Others crouched behind what little cover they had, their flares marking the LZ like desperate beacons. My throat went dry. This was it. We dropped fast, the world lurching, my harness digging into my chest as the pilot brought us down low. The rotors kicked up dirt and debris, turning the night into a storm of dust. Visibility cut to nothing, and through the haze I could see the wounded. One clutching his stomach, blood soaking through his uniform, another limp and pale, dragged by a buddy who looked barely strong enough to carry him. My headset filled with warnings. Taking fire. Left side. And I swung the weapon, eyes scanning, fingers steady, not firing blindly, but ready, always ready. Because in that moment you are their shield, the barrier between the men in the dirt and the darkness trying to consume them. The bird touched down with a jolt, skids digging into the ground, and the medic leapt into motion, scrambling out with practiced speed, his hands already reaching for the nearest casualty. I covered him, eyes wide, ears ringing with the thunder of gunfire and rotor wash, shouting into the calms as I tracked movement in the shadows. The minutes stretched into eternity, men dragging bodies, medics shouting, pilots holding us steady as the desert screamed around us. And through it all, I stayed focused, because one truth was clear. If I faltered, even for a second, someone wouldn't make it home. When the last casualty was pulled aboard, and the medics shouted, "Go! Go! Go!" the pilots didn't hesitate. They pulled us back into the air with a surge that slammed me against my harness, the ground dropping away, the gunfire fading beneath us, the night swallowing the chaos as fast as it had spat it out. My chest heaved, sweat soaking through my uniform, hands aching from the grip I hadn't loosened, and as the desert shrank below, I allowed myself the smallest exhale of relief, not because it was over, but because we were still alive, because the bird had done its job, because the men we carried now had a chance they hadn't before. And in that moment, as the medic worked frantically over the wounded, as the pilots called out bearings, as the desert stretched endless and dark beneath us, I realized something I would carry forever. The war isn't defined by the battles you read in history books, by the medals they pin on a chest, or by the speeches generals give in ceremonies. It's defined by nights like this, by young soldiers barely older than kids lying pale on a stretcher, by the calm voice of a lieutenant saying "Viper, Dawn, eyes up," and by a woman in her late 20s wiping helmets in a gear room until the call came, and everything changed. The desert wind still howled in my headset as we tore back toward base, the rotors hammering the night, the smell of blood sharp in the cabin, and every second stretched longer than the last because when you're carrying the wounded, the bird feels heavier, the air feels thinner, and your heart pounds not for yourself, but for the fragile lives strapped down inches from you. Their breath shallow, their skin ghost pale under the green wash of night vision, and all you can do is steady your hands. And remind yourself you're part of the chain that might hold them here, just a little longer, just enough to get them home. The medic's voice was calm but relentless as he barked out vitals, pressed gauze into wounds, pushed needles into arms, and though I could see sweat streaking down his temple, his hands never faltered, like the chaos of war had burned all hesitation out of him long ago. I wanted to help, wanted to reach over and hold the shoulder of the youngest one, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, his uniform shredded, lips trembling as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. But my place was by the door, eyes out, weapon ready, because my role wasn't comfort, it was defense, vigilance. The barrier that made it possible for the medic to keep working without fear of another shadow rising out of the dark. The pilots' voices came steady through the comms, cutting across the tension with bearings, altitude, and ETA, but beneath the clipped precision I heard something else, something quiet but unshakable. The weight of knowing every maneuver, every second trimmed off the flight time, could mean the difference between that 19-year-old kid breathing or slipping into silence before we hit the tarmac. My own breathing had fallen into that old rhythm again, syncing with the blades. Inhale, exhale, whoop whoop whoop, and I clung to it like a lifeline. The same way I had when fear first tried to climb into my chest back in training. Because rhythm is survival, rhythm is focus, and in those minutes I couldn't afford to think about myself, couldn't afford to let doubt or panic crack the shell of calm I had built. The medic caught my eye once, just a flash across the dim green glow, and I saw the truth written in his face. One of them wasn't going to make it unless we cut this flight shorter, unless the bird could find another gear, another impossible burst of speed that physics didn't allow. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. I keyed my mic, my voice flat, steady. Bird needs speed. We're losing him. The pilot didn't answer with words, but the nose dipped and the rotors screamed harder, the desert rushing beneath us in a blur, and the bird shuddered as though protesting. But it held, because sometimes machines feel the urgency too. Sometimes they know when they're carrying more than steel and fuel. I watched the medic lean over the wounded, shouting into his mic for the trauma team to be ready, blood dripping across his gloves, his forearm muscles taut as he pumped compressions, and for a second I thought, this is what the world never sees. The moment when war isn't glory or flags or speeches but sweat, dirt, blood, and the desperate grip of human hands refusing to let another slip away. The lights of the base shimmered into view on the horizon, faint at first, and then brighter, growing until the whole compound was a beacon in the dark, and I felt a surge in my chest. Not relief exactly, but something close, like the first crack of dawn after the longest night. The pilot's voices sharpened, calling descent, the bird dropping fast, dust whipping up again as the runway loomed closer, and my knuckles whitened on the weapon even though I knew the danger was behind us now. Because when you stared into shadows that want to swallow your brother's whole, you don't unclench until the skids kiss concrete. We slammed down hard, the bird bouncing once before settling, and the medics on the ground swarmed in, their hands reaching, stretchers sliding, shouting orders with the kind of authority that comes only when seconds mean lives. I unclipped, moving with them, lifting, carrying, guiding stretchers out into the flood of floodlights, and for a moment the world became nothing but movement. Bodies, shadows, hands, blood, lights, all of it colliding in the furious dance of survival. When the last of them was gone, when the trauma base swallowed the wounded into its white walls, I stood at the edge of the tarmac, helmet still in my hand, rotor wash stinging my face, and I realized I was shaking, not in fear, but in the sudden release of everything I'd been holding and since the lieutenant's voice crackled over the radio. My lieutenant came up beside me, his hand heavy on my shoulder, and for a long moment he didn't say anything, just stood there with me, both of us staring at the doors where our patients had disappeared. Finally, he muttered, "Good work, Viper. You kept it steady." It was a small phrase, almost casual, but in our world it meant everything, because steady is life. Steady is the reason we bring more home than we lose. Later, long after the blades stopped spinning and the night grew quiet again, I found myself back in the gear room, the same rag still sitting on the table where I had dropped it, the helmet still lined up in a neat row. I picked one up, turned it in my hands, and for the first time that night, I let the weight of it settle on me. Not just the plastic and glass, but the truth of what it meant, of how something as small as a clean visor could mean clarity when seconds mattered, of how a strap checked one more time could mean survival when gravity tried to throw a man out into chaos. I thought of the 19-year-old, of the medic's frantic hands, of the pilots banking us through fire, and I knew with a certainty I'd carry for the rest of my life. None of it was small. Not a single wipe, not a single check, not a single task. Years from now, people might talk about that night like it was just another mission, another medevac in a long list no one outside our circle will ever hear about. And maybe they'll be right. Maybe history will never write our names down. Maybe no medals will shine in glass cases to remind the world of what happened. But I'll remember. I'll remember the dust, the heat, the blood, the weight of a helmet in my hands, and the voice of a lieutenant cutting through the quiet. Viper Dawn, eyes up. And when I do, I'll smile, not because it was easy, not because it was glorious, but because in that moment I learned the truth my father tried to teach me long ago, that the world is held together not by speeches or grand gestures, but by steady hands in forgotten rooms, by people who show up when the call comes, and by those who believe that even the smallest task can carry the weight of everything.